Hey everyone, you're listening to the Vent Podcast, your source for market insights, wine industry news, and updates on our current collections. Enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vent Podcast. We have an exciting episode today as we just launched a flash sale of Rosé champagne. We're excited to share this collection with our users and dive into a little bit of the highlights and why we think it's a great investment to feature on the Vent platform. And later on in the episode, we'll have Andrew Shirley, who is the editor of the Knight Frank Wealth Report. We're excited to sit down with Andrew and talk about the assets around the world that higher net worth individuals are focused on, and where wine and whiskey played a outsized role in 2021. So we're excited to dive into that with Andrew. But first, let's turn it over to Billy to discuss the Rosé Champagne collection and some of the highlights for that offering.
Yeah, awesome. I'm really excited to dive into this collection. It is only our second flash sale. For those who have been with us for a while, we had a flash sale on Christmas of Petrus. So today, we're launching a collection of Rosé champagne from multiple vintages, only 1,000 shares at $41 a share. So $41,000 total collection. And we're really excited. It's going to go fast. To really dive in, like why Rosé champagne and why, we're kind of doing a smaller collection with it is first, champagne overall had a really great year in 2021 in the secondary market. There was growth across the category. And for those who don't know, predominantly the sales and secondary market trading in champagne has traditionally been for white champagne. And this is for multiple reasons. One is there's just a lot more white champagne made. For many years, due to the harsh conditions of growing grapes in Champagne, the red grapes didn't actually ripen well enough to have the skins be used in the making of Rosé champagne. In the way Rosé champagne is made, there are various ways. There's traditional Rosé making ways, whether it be like saignée, bleeding some of the juice off of red grapes or leaving the skins in contact with the juice for a little while. But champagne is unique in the fact that it can actually blend two base wines that are fermented and finished together to make a champagne or a rosé. So this means that they can make a white wine and a red wine, and then they'll put a little bit of the red wine in with the white wine, and then they'll put it into the bottle for secondary fermentation. So what this means, though, is to make that red wine, you need properly ripe Pinot Noir. And that didn't typically happen in Champagne just because it's in northern France every year. With global warming, we are starting to see a little bit more. But traditionally, there's just been very little Rosé champagne made because the red grapes never really ripened to the point of usability. So that brings us to this collection. Rosé champagne, it did see an overall kind of increase in excitement along with champagne as a whole category last year. Like I was saying before, investment and collector attention in white champagne skyrocketed last year. There was a double-digit growth across the category in terms of values. And Rosé is really starting to kind of come along with the white champagne. What Rosé has and white champagne doesn't necessarily need is more the understanding and the notoriety. So as white champagne's booming in prices, Rosé champagne is just now beginning to be more readily consumed and collected. Last year, it was up to 18% of total trades by value on Livex, Rosé champagne was. So it's really just starting to get a foothold and become a really important player in the larger champagne mix. And we'll dive in a second for all the wines in this collection. But one of the wines featured in this collection is the 2012 Cristal Rosé. And that wine was the number one champagne traded by value on Livex of all white or red, white or rosé last year. So that's really exciting. So it's really showing that rosé is starting to get attention. It's starting to come to the limelight. And while white champagne really had a year last year, there's a lot of room for growth in the rosé department as attention continues to grow. It's gaining a lot of traction in the US with trades last year, actually purchases last year up 200+% in the United States of rosé champagne. So there's a lot of momentum behind it, and it's really well poised to kind of follow this progress and excitement that the white champagne has paved the way for in 2021.
Yeah, that's really awesome, Billy. This is a collection I'm personally really excited about. And I noticed a few kind of different things when looking at the collection page. One was the variety of bottle sizes. We have several 750s as well as Magnums, 1.5 liter bottles of the Cristal Rosé. Can you tell us a little bit about why we included two different size formats?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess even taking one step back, I'll quickly outline the wines in the collections. So we have Louis Roederer's Cristal Rosé 2012, both in 750 mil and 100 or 1500 Magnum formats. And we also have the Louis Roederer Cristal Vinotech Rosé, which is a special bottling of their rosé from the 99 vintage, both in Magnum as well as 750 mil. And then the collection's rounded out with Paul Roger, Rosé Brut Vintage 2002, as well as Charles Heidsieck Rosé Millésime 2008 as well. So the reason why we have two wines, both in 750 milliliters and 1500, is that champagne magnums are valued very highly in the collector community. And part of this is because just like in other wines, the wine develops a little bit in bottle. It continues to develop nice and slowly. But the other piece is the freshness and the acid. So what really makes champagne special is the freshness, the bubbles, and the balance between that bright, fresh acidity and the fruit. And in magnums, that tends to last longer in these bottles, and it tends to develop beautifully in the larger format, more so than in still wines. It's really important. So I was actually speaking with one of our advisors, a merchant in the UK, yesterday, and we were discussing the premium that magnums from champagne typically garner, and it's on the magnitude of 20 to 30% on average. So if you were to multiply, say a 750 mil by 2, you would think that would equal the price of a Magnum, but that's not the case. The Magnum has a premium put on it, that 20% plus, just due to the unique way that it develops in the bottle, the wine develops, and the way it maintains the freshness and gets the beauty of the vintage for longer. So it's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, and on the retail market, Magnums are typically priced higher than 750s, in excess of, how you said, just multiplying the price by 2. And that's because of the way that the Magnums have to be bottled. That's right.
It's not just that. It's the culmination. Like I was just kind of saying, it retains and its freshness and develops. It retains its bubbles, freshness, and develops better as well. So there is more cost in bottling. There is better development, but also when you think about champagne as well, it's typically a celebration wine, and it's also just for major events. So you're also more likely to have people desire a magnum of champagne for a certain occasion than you might for maybe a larger bottle of red or white as well. So there's a bunch of things between demand, wine development, and also just actually making the wine and bottling it as well.
Yeah, and the like culture and mystique of champagne definitely lends itself to walking into a room with an oversized bottle, right, and being able to pour around for folks. Just you're always the life of the party if you walk in with a Magnum or larger size of champagne. So that definitely adds to kind of the essence of like what champagne culture is.
For sure.
When we were there this past week in France, we got to visit Maison Runart in Champagne, and everything about the house and the other houses in champagne houses in the area, it was just all big, opulent, kind of celebratory culture in the area. When we went to Runart, there was in the cave tour and the tour we did of the estate, there was a lot of focus on their connection with the art community. There were all these, art installations within the house there, and even in art, a large moving art installation down deep, 38 meters down in the caves underneath the chateau. So that was it definitely underscored for me kind of like I said, the essence and mystique of champagne, which I think kind of relates to the extra value that people place on large format champagne.
Yeah, that's awesome. Fun fact, the Ruinart, or Thierry Ruinart, who was the founder, he eventually got to be called Dom. I think it's an honorary title. They created the first, I guess, champagne house completely dedicated to sparkling wine in 1729. So that's a fun fact for you.
Yeah, and they showed us they had the original artwork, advertising artwork for champagne that they had made out of the house there, and I forget the year, but I guess would have been the late 1800s. Is that right? Or earlier than that?
It depends what it was really after. So 1729 was when their specific house was created just to sell sparkling wine. But that said, it also brings up an interesting point, is that when I say dedicated sparkling, there were still wines made in Champagne for years and years, and then the sparkling started happening. This was kind of due to when the grapes are harvested in Champagne, they would start fermenting, and then sometimes it would be so cold during the winters there that when they would bottle the wines, it wasn't completely done fermenting, and the wines would warm up, and then they would get kind of these bubbles in them. So for a really long time, Champagne wine producers were kind of confused and annoyed by the bubbles, and it wasn't really embraced really until more like the 1800s. So it was kind of interesting that Ruinart was really a trailblazer in saying, like, we're going to focus on sparkling and make good ones. And they were kind of ahead of the curve there, whereas everybody else was kind of making sparkling and still wines and trying to work through, because one of the main issues back in the day was the glass wasn't strong enough until partway through the 1800s, that bottles would explode regularly if they didn't have the right kind of dosage, or is it the tirage, but basically the amount of part of the secondary fermentation. If it was made with too many atmospheres of pressure, the bottles would just explode. One book I was reading said people were walking around with like fencing helmets sometimes when they would tour Champagne. So just in case glass exploded.
Yeah, I was all mixed up on my dates, but you're right. It was early and mid 1700s that there's advertisements that I was mentioning. The tour guide when we were at Ruinart said that advertisement for Champagne from the chateau there was it's recorded as one of the first, if not the first, consumer advertisement as we know it across any segment. So that was really interesting that kind of culture of consumer directed advertising artwork might have started there at Ruinart.
Yeah, and that's become such a fixture across Champagne as a whole. Everybody's, seen these. I would say Champagne probably advertises more for their general brand in their wines than any other region in the world that I can think of.
Yeah, that's definitely probably true. I mean, think of like if you were going to see a wine ad in New York City, I would think of brands like Moet and Cristal, and that's kind of what comes to mind.
Yeah. So, like I said before, this collection is only 1,000 shares. It's going to go fast. It just launched this morning. So make sure you grab some of your shares. Last time our Champagne collection sold out, the one in July, actually, our original one, sold out very quickly. And that was basically double this size. So be sure to get in as soon as you can and get your shares.
Yeah, like I said, I'm really excited about this collection also, Billy, but we do have 2 other collections still live right now on the platform. Maybe you could give us a status update on those and just where we're at with selling through those collections.
Yeah, so we have the 2010 Decade Collection that launched just last week. That is down to just about under 1,000 shares at the time of recording, which is really exciting. It's about halfway gone. And then the Piemonte Collection has a little over 1/3 of the shares left as well. So I definitely, both of those are $50 a share. They're steals, the top wines from each region. I think the interesting part there is the Piemonte and the La Pen alone. Each of those collections, in those wines, in each of those collections, the Monfortino and the Piemonte and the La Pen in the best decade, the 2010 decade. Those are both like $4,000 to $5,000 minimum, basically a bottle anyway. So it's really exciting to be able to get a piece of a collection with those wines included for only $50. On that note, let's talk about our last week a little bit quickly here. You were traveling, I was traveling. You've touched on your trip a little bit, but what was your favorite part of France while you were there?
Ooh, yeah, we got to, between France and Switzerland, we got to see, I think, 14 cities along the eastern side of France, down through Champagne, through Alsace, where they make a lot of excellent Riesling, up into the Alps. And then we kind of finished our trip through Burgundy. And I think that Burgundy was maybe my favorite region. There were a lot of great things about the other regions. And obviously Champagne was excellent too. But Burgundy, just when you're driving through the, national highway through Burgundy, it's just so clear when you look at the geography. Just the way that the vineyards are laid out, and the designation between classifications. When you think about Premier Cru, Grand Cru, it's really clear on the ground level the impact that geography has on these vineyards. So that was one really cool aspect of visiting Burgundy. The other was just the proximity to Dijon, which is the closest large city to the region, and we got to go in there a little bit, had some excellent food and wine in the city. It's a great city, bustling around, and a lot of really excellent architecture and history. But the wine experience in Burgundy and in Dijon was just top notch. Had two great tastings and tours there as well. So
nice. Yeah, I've heard Dijon is one of the culinary capitals of Europe. So that's exciting. And then, yeah, I've still yet to make it to Burgundy. I'm excited to, but yeah, I've heard that Route Nationale, basically like one side of the Route Nationale is where all the Premier Cru and Grand Cru will be, at least up, especially in the Côte de Nuit. And then if you go across the street, for the most part, those are where you get down to the village and the general Burgundy one. So that's kind of cool to be able to see one side versus the other.
Yeah, and the village, I think you are right on the, I guess the maybe eastern side, I guess it is, of the road is mainly village, and then on the western side there's maybe one I don't know, maybe like 3 blocks, vineyard blocks of village, and then like you said, as the hill starts to slope up, you get Premier Cru and Grand Cru. Mm-hmm. And getting to go to Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, the vineyards there, and get a photograph right outside the kind of gate. It's, there's no markings for DRC. It's just kind of a gated chateau, and then the vineyards, obviously, that slope up into the hill or against the bottom of the hill. And it was really cool to go to that site. It's kind of one of the 3 maybe like meccas for the wine world, right? Maybe also Petrus, and I don't know. I said 3 because I was leaving another spot open for a contender, but
I would say Hermitage is up there as well.
Hermitage, okay. So Hermitage, Petrus, and then Vosne Romani and Romanée-Conti and La Tâche. Those vineyards were, yeah, definitely special to be there.
Yeah, no, that's pretty iconic. Cool. Well, then I'll share a little bit about my travels last week. Nick and I were in New York for Vin Expo, which was exciting. The first Vint wine conference presence, and we got to meet with a bunch of interesting producers. I sat through a couple master classes, got to sit down with Mary Gorman and MW, who actually had just presented a master class on Cru Bourgeois wines. We had a great conversation. She'll hopefully be coming on to do some webinars and be on the podcast down the line too. So that was exciting. Awesome. Yeah, no, she's so nice. She had full of so much information. She teaches some WSET diploma courses, so I got to pick her brain about that and how to approach the master if I am lucky enough to pass these tests. So that was exciting. And then I would say the other piece, I guess, is a master class that I referenced kind of earlier. I sat through 2 of them. One was on Cru Bourgeois, but one was on Chilean wines. And that was a really interesting class just to kind of sit through and think about how long of a country Chile is, but also um, the different growing regions, even west to east. So they have the Andes Mountains on one side, the ocean on the other side, and then there's like this little middle valley. So I kind of encourage everyone to just kind of go dive in and check out Chilean wines, because we tasted a bunch of really interesting things, from a Chardonnay that was grown in the Atacama Desert up in the north, to some Carmenere that was grown in Colchagua and some other regions, and then a bunch of blends of Cabernet and with some Carmenere mixed in and some Merlot. And it's a really interesting country. And they had a couple winemakers there actually sharing these really small plot wines that had been vinified for a long time. And it was really interesting just to taste the range, and the quality of Chilean wines continues to really impress. And then this week also, I was able to taste a Pais, Pais, which is technically the grape Listan Prieto, which was brought over by the Spanish when they came and kind of colonized both like Mexico and South America. And it's an ancient grape in terms of, I guess, the North America. It's one of the oldest grape varieties that's been used to make wine here. And it's interesting. It's starting to make a comeback. It kind of had been known originally back in the day. It was grown for high volume and kind of known for making like insipid, kind of not too flavorful wines. But now people are really kind of trying to revive it and make it into some really interesting. They're very approachable. They're never going to be a huge body, but they're really interesting kind of drinkable wines, perfect for like a chilled red. So I would definitely keep an eye out for those as well. But look into Chilean wines as a whole. They're really on the upslope.
That just confirms I've talked about going down to visit Chile for a while now, and so that definitely confirms my interest in going down to see what they're doing as far as food and wine.
Likewise, yeah, I'm trying to finagle a New Year's trip down there next year so we can be there in the summertime.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, cool. Well, that's our main topics for today. Let's transition on over to Andrew, Shirley, and Knight Frank's Wealth Report.
Yeah, great. Fantastic to be with you, Brady. Fantastic to be chatting, Billy.
Again, thanks for joining us. We'd love to hear more about Knight Frank, about the Wealth Report and its current iteration and your role there.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brady. I mean, Knight Frank is the world's leading independent, privately owned real estate business. So we sell amazing houses, help people invest in commercial real estate, value it, sell it, buy it, consult on it. So we're pretty sort of full service global property business with a focus on high net worth individuals, which was one of the reasons why we created the Wealth Report about 16 years ago. It was to help our high net worth clients understand the world that they're living in, the threats, the opportunities, what's driving wealth creation around the world. And out of that came the Luxury Investment Index, which is, I guess, what we're going to talk about most. Today, we realised that our clients aren't just interested in buying amazing homes and property off us. Obviously, they like to buy art to go on the walls of those properties. They like to fill their wine cellars with amazing wines, or they like to have amazing classic cars parked outside their houses. So we decided to create this Luxury Investment Index that tracks the value of 10 of those different asset classes. So that's really the sort of genesis of the Wealth Report and the Luxury Investment Index. And I'm lucky enough to edit the Wealth Report and also compile the Luxury Investment Index.
So what the Wealth Investment Index is really interesting to me. What are those 10 components that go into it?
Right, well, you're asking now, but we've got wine, watches, art, coins, rare whiskey, handbags, cars, jewelry, coloured diamonds, and furniture. So those are our 10 different, which we kind of feel is a sort of broad spectrum of what our clients like to own and collect.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. No, it's nice to get a general landscape of how broad this really is, including watches and the furniture piece too is always interesting. In your digging in overall, how did you really get into this from the Knight Frank side of things? Like, I guess personally, like, what is a little bit more of your background, and then how have you led into becoming editor of this report?
Well, I suppose my background before joining Knight Frank, I was a journalist, so I sort of know how to string a few sentences together. So when the opportunity to edit the Wealth Report came up, and the Wealth Report is Knight Frank's leading piece of thought leadership around the world. I mean, I jumped at the chance to sort of stamp my impression on the report, and I've tried to sort of broaden it out beyond property, because we know that our clients aren't just interested in property. There's more to their lives and their aspirations and interests than that. So really what I wanted to make the report do is show that we understand, our client broader interests, and they are absolutely fascinated in these objects of desire, these luxury investments. And who wouldn't want to write about amazing classic cars or fine wine or interesting watches, or all that kind of stuff. And one of the latest additions has been rare whiskey. So I mean, it's just so fascinating to write about, and as a journalist, it's an amazing opportunity to cover these fascinating asset classes.
And is there a level of kind of ongoing analysis and data collection that goes into whether or not you might add or subtract a particular asset from the index? Has it happened in the past that you've either added or removed an asset, or has it been the same 10 since you started the index?
No, it's a great question, Brady. And yes, we have taken things out. We used to have stamps in the index, for example, but then we struggled to get robust 10-year data for stamps. And that's the key thing. Any asset class that's in the index, I need to have at least 10 years of data that I can say that I trust. So we took out stamps, for example. And then it became apparent that rare whiskey was becoming this really hot asset class, particularly in China. A lot of my colleagues were saying their clients were collecting rare whiskey. And once I got a decent data set that had 10 years worth of data for rare whiskey, then we decided to include that into the index. And that's been a real hit. A lot of people are interested in rare whiskey. And then the latest one was these sort of Hermes collectible handbags. Again, a lot of our clients were interested in that. We got a good data set for that asset class, so we decided to put handbags in. I mean, it doesn't have to be 10, but I quite like having sort of 10 asset classes to track. It's a nice round number. And what we do to get our overall index, it's an average of the performance of those 10 different asset classes, but we kind of weight it. So, for example, art, because more people collect art than, say, coloured diamonds, art is weighted more heavily. So we've done some survey work on what our clients collect, and the more popular investment classes contribute more to the overall Knight Frank luxury investment index itself.
Yeah, that's really interesting to get a little bit more of that nuance. That makes a lot of sense, because the sheer dollars traded or volume of elements traded, I guess, varies greatly between the categories. It is interesting that the Knight Frank report is actually something that our founders, Nick and Patrick, referenced when their early days of identifying wine as an asset class, and is it something worth pursuing in terms of building a company around. I remember when I first joined, it was actually one of the first pieces of research. Nick was like, get familiar with the category. Here's the Knight Frank report. So
excellent. Good. Great to hear.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. Let's dive into this year's report. Is there any? I mean, we can talk about the elephant in the room, I guess, wine in general. But what were some trends you saw from 2021, from 2020, and before that?
I think the main theme that we've seen in this year's Wealth Report is, despite COVID, or maybe even because of COVID, anybody who owned a sort of tangible asset in 2021 has done pretty well. Wealth creation rose around the world. The value of prime property around the world, which is obviously our sort of raison d'etre, increased. And the same can be said for our luxury investment index. Overall, it was up 9% in 2021, which is the strongest performance since we created it about eight or so years ago. We saw really strong double-digit growth for a couple of the asset classes. You'll be pleased to know that actually wine jointly with watches they were the top performing assets this year, up on average 16%. And then we had art coming in third place with growth of 13%. 13%. All of the different asset classes actually rose. So if you were lucky enough to own a wine collection, an art collection, or a collection of Rolex watches, you'll have seen the value of those increase last year. So in general, it was a really strong performance for the luxury investment index, which I think is reflected across any sort of tangible asset class. At the moment in 2021, they all did very, very well.
Well, number one, it's great that wine performed well. We had an inkling it was going to be up there this year, but we didn't know it would be a top performer until we got the report. Looking at the report, I love all the graphics you guys have. On one of the graphics is kind of like the growth over the year. And whiskeys, I noticed, was like enormous compared to some of the other ones. What are those, like, general graphs, and what was that gauging really, whiskey compared to the rest?
So we track the performance of these different asset classes over two periods, 12-month period, and then over the longer term. So we look back over the past 10 years. And if you're looking back over the past 10 years, rare whiskey, according to the index that was compiled for us by a sort of rare whiskey specialist, has clearly been the top performer over the past 10 years, growth of over 400%. Last year it was 9%, so still it's pretty strong performance. But in some of the previous years, we've seen way beyond double-digit growth for rare whiskey, and it's there's just not so much rare whiskey kicking around as there is wine. I mean, there's a lot of wine that you can buy, but rare whiskey, because it's so old, because it's been produced in more limited quantities, there's not that much of it. So when a whole sort of group of people decide they're going to start collecting whiskey, just the supply and demand equation just pushes the values up, and that happens over the past 10 years really quickly. So that's why you see that big peak on our charts for rare whiskey over the past 10 years.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's kind of that growth along with the continued demand is one of the reasons we also 20% of our collections is whiskey as well. So it's interesting to see that kind of. I'm happy it's in your index and coming to the forefront, and good to see the momentum continued through 2021.
And just curious, Andrew, and just in terms of maybe like anecdotal data conversations that you might have with folks in your networks, or when you're doing data collecting, in the conversations that you're having, do you see the same amount of excitement around, just say, whiskey or wine being expressed as we do actually in the numbers when we think about value traded and things like that?
I think they're still both very strong asset classes for our clients. I mean, I think perhaps we've seen peak rare whiskey, the real sort of frothy period when a lot more people were starting to collect it. I mean, it's still performing really strongly. But I think we've probably seen that period of really exuberant growth. It's now going to be, perhaps maybe more serious, longer term collectors, and the market might settle down a little bit. But I mean, last year 9% growth wasn't to be sniffed at. But I mean, wine is like art. It's one of those perennial things that the vast majority of our clients will have an art collection, and most of them will drink wine. So you've got that sort of really robust depth to the market, and more people are looking at it potentially as an investment rather than just buying it to drink. I mean, some of these indices become slightly self-fulfilling. The more you talk about something as an investment, the more people are interested in buying it, perhaps beyond its sort of wider appeal. Although it's worth saying, we do, as part of the wealth report, do what we call our attitude survey of wealth advisors around the world, talking about their clients. We do ask, why do people collect these things? And on average, globally, the majority of people are still collecting these things for joy of ownership, although investment potential is running quite a close second at the moment.
Yeah, at 400%. You said 10-year growth. It would have to start to run a close second to that would have to be part of the joy of collecting. And about 20% of our offerings at Vint, our plans right now to be comprised of whiskey. And one of the things that we talk about often is when we think about wine and whiskey in comparison to one another, and maybe you can talk about comparisons that you've seen in the report, but wine continues to age, and the best wines improve. By that I mean in the bottle, right? Whereas whiskeys don't. They only improve in cask. So it's a really interesting and unique kind of demand pressure that's put on wine, in that, as supply drops and people drink it, the physical product is also getting better, which isn't the case with bottled whiskey, at least. Obviously cask whiskey. But yeah, those are two extremely interesting asset classes, and maybe you can dive in a little bit and talk about in this iteration of the report, kind of comparing and contrasting and sharing highlights of both wine and whiskey conversely.
I think one thing you always have to be careful about when you look at these figures is you have to see what they're actually tracking. So, for example, our rare whiskey index purely tracks the value of rare bottles of whiskey. It's not looking at casks or anything like that. So you kind of just have to bear that in mind. So a lot of the whiskey market's quite interesting, because I think a lot of it is around provenance, a lot of it is around brand, and obviously rarity. And some of these expressions of whiskey haven't necessarily actually been tasted, and $1 million a bottle or whatever they fetch these days, it's unlikely that they will. Whereas I think the wine market is much more nuanced. You are relying more on the sort of recommendations and the sort of gradings from wine experts to give that specific vintages their value, aren't you? So I wouldn't say there's not connoisseurship in the rare whiskey market, because there is, but I think there's a lot more of it perhaps in the wine sector. You do rely more on these ratings and these gradings by the wine experts, and obviously it's a lot more. The quality varies, doesn't it, depending on the climate? You can have good years, you can have bad years for wine, but really there's not so much that influences the rare whiskey market. I mean, what goes into it is quite a controlled process, but it's it's the provenance, it's the rarity, it's the branding, the skill of the the maltster or the blender. But you kind of know a bit what you're getting, and as you say, once it's in the bottle, it's in the bottle. It's not really going to change. But the wine market is much more nuanced, which is probably why you need much better advice when you're sort of considering investing in it, and you just need to know the market and know the fact that maybe there was a drought in Burgundy last year and there weren't so many Burgundy grapes, so that means your Romney de Conti or whatever is going to be much more valuable for this vintage. I think you drink both of them, but I think the wine and the rare whiskey markets are very different in my view. It's much harder to sum up the wine market in a few paragraphs, which is what we have to do in the wealth report, because it's just there's so many different geographies producing so many different sorts of wine, so many different climatic conditions. So it's hard to describe the wine market in a couple of sentences, really.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because the rare whiskeys, some of them are very old, but they're not valued because they came from a special year. Maybe they did have a certain distiller, maybe there were certain stills that were still in use at the time, but it's more just their pure age. Rather, certain bottles of wine, whether it be like 82 Bordeaux or even older in like the 40s, they're valued because of the vintage and their age. But it's more, if you have to get it from that specific year, you can't just get any 80-year-old bottle of Burgundy and say it's going to be great. I think that's an important nuance. But the other weird part on the whiskey side is there are, for famous wine regions, the grapes from the general vineyards, for the most part, are going to continue to be grown and produced. Maybe the winemaker will change, maybe the producer who owns the vineyard will change. But like for Kurosawa, for example, in a Japanese whiskey example, their distillery closed and it'll never open again. So that's something that's like will happen in the whiskey side of things, which probably, I mean, it might happen on the wine side. There are some wines that'll never be made again, but that's another interesting difference. That to your point is because whiskey is so process driven and not as tied to place as much.
Yeah, I mean, you get these sort of what they call the Scottish ghost distilleries, sort of distilleries that have stopped producing decades ago, but there's still the casks of whiskey that were produced and that have been maturing and are now ready to sell. And those kinds of casks from ghost distilleries, will have a little bit of a premium. And I think there's a certain romance about the rare whiskey market that appeals to people, Highlands of Scotland, the malts, the peats, all of those sorts of things. I think, to a certain extent, collecting rare whiskies is a little bit like collecting things like stamps or coins. People collect them because they like to have the collection. So they'll have every sort of Macallan from different eras. They'll have all of the special editions. They like to build up a really complete collection, which I don't think is quite the same for the wine market. You wouldn't buy a 1980 bottle of some vintage or wine that wasn't any good. You just wouldn't want it, would you? But people like to have the full set of. I mean, I think there's a Japanese set of whiskey based around playing cards or something like that. It's quite famous, and if you've got the full set of all the different playing cards on the whiskey labels, it's quite rare, and people will buy limited edition whiskies because a famous artist has done the label or something like that, which I don't think you would get in wine. You have to have a good product in the bottle. It doesn't matter if it's got a fancy label. You've got to have the product to back it. But I'm not sure that's always the case with whiskey. People just like collecting the bottles to have the full set. A special edition of a particular rare whiskey.
Right. Those are like the two kind of sides of the scale, right? It's like collectability, or maybe like rarity and collectability, and also like consumability, or the quality, like when of the actual product itself. And definitely whiskey, I think summarized whiskey is weighting maybe more towards rarity and collectability, like as a kind of a token asset, right? Versus when we think about wine as, like you said, if it's 1980X and it's, wasn't a good year and doesn't have great ratings, I'll probably just pass on it. I'll buy it.
Why would you want it?
Yeah, exactly. Because which I think is really, unique in wine is that it's kind of always maintained this tradition of wine is meant to be shared. It's meant to be drunk and consumed, which, I think is, I don't know if you can say positive or negative about it, but it's certainly nice that we still maintain the tradition of, you buy it to drink, you buy it to enjoy it, and not just to hold it on a shelf.
It does always seem a shame that, you do have some people who collect it and the wine never leaves a bonded warehouse. It just stays there and gets passed from one collector to another. You always hope that at the end of the day someone's going to be drinking it and enjoying it.
Yeah, and that's part of why, like, at Vint right now, we're in these early stages of kind of amassing these collections, but part of our mission here is these events and education where we actually try to bring people to learn more about the regions. Maybe they're tasting second wines that they can drink on a regular basis, and they're learning more about these wines. And then down the line, as we look to liquidate these, sellers we're going to be having, that's part of our goal there, is to make sure the end consumer, whether we were selling to hospitality or retailers, making sure that basically we've kept these wines in proper shape, but that they're actually reaching the market and being consumed. I actually had somebody recently ask me, she's like, I had somebody at a restaurant, like sommelier, ask, like, why would you want to work for that? That's basically saying that we're not going to be able to get any of these wines ever because they're all just going to be held by like investment companies now, and nobody's ever going to drink them. And that's something we certainly want to make sure we don't have happen. And we were able to, work with all of our partners to not just leave these things to go bad.
Well, hopefully you also get the chance to sample the wines before you decide which ones you're going to buy for your portfolios.
Yeah. We right now, a lot of the initial collections, we rely on a lot of our partners overseas who have been able to vet, and obviously provenance is of utmost. So much of these come directly from Chateau to our partners to us. But yeah, we're working on getting to taste as many of them as we can. And unfortunately, we can't taste the whiskeys, to your point earlier, but we would like to be able to. One other side note, back to the playing card thing. I recently was listening to a podcast as we were prepping for our Kurosawa collection, and somebody, I can't remember which one it was, but they were saying they went to a party, and right when the playing cards first came out, and a guy had a party where he had all of the bottles, and they all had some at that party just for fun, and that was before they were worth anything. So the guy's like,
excellent.
Looking back now, I wish that guy's probably kicking himself for having that party, but he was like, it was a unique experience. So,
well, there's a story of a very rare Macallan, the one that makes over $1 million when it comes up for auction. I think there was only 26 or 28 bottles, but apparently one was on a shelf in Japan during an earthquake, and the shelf vibrated and the whiskey bottle fell off. So that was a lot of money down the drain. But obviously, when you lose a bottle, it makes the rest of them even more valuable.
True, but that's, to your other point about the difference between whiskey and wine, the opacity when these things come out about how many of these bottles exist. I mean, eventually distillers are prominently saying it now, but you don't know how many of these old casks still exist, what their fill level is in those casks, like how much liquid is actually left. So it's really interesting. I think there's going to be more and more transparency brought to the whiskey market, which I think will bring more attention. It might bring a little less speculation, but it'll bring more attention and proper detail, I guess, to actual pricing. Going back to this year's wealth report, was there anything that surprised you that you saw that you weren't expecting this year?
Well, in terms of luxury collectibles, I think I was surprised by how fast the NFT, the non-fungible token sort of art market had increased. We knew it was coming when that work of art by Beeple sold last year for over $60 million, but I was slightly shocked by the sheer volume of this NFT art market. I mean, there's an estimated $25 billion or so of this NFT art that was created in 2021, which is staggering when you look at the sort of the total art market, art and antiques and that kind of thing is ballpark around $50 billion a year, and then you've got this new asset class in 1 year, $25 billion. So I was quite surprised that the NFT market had taken off quite so quickly in such volumes in such a short amount of time. I mean, people have been turning everything into NFTs that they can get their hands on. I think there's a sort of few rare whiskey editions where people have tried to link them to NFTs, but I think that was what surprised me, just how quickly that market had taken off.
Yeah, I would say. Oh, Brady, go ahead.
I just wonder, when we think about just the underlying technology of digital custody, digital ownership, provenance, back to kind of some earlier comments that we had here about wine and whiskey. I just wonder, as we kind of get over the hump of excitement about NFTs, what, when we think about high net worth individuals and luxury assets, how much that underlying technology continues to play a role, and whether or not that trend will kind of dip a ton and then level out, or will continue kind of up and to the right, just based on just like the quality of the underlying technology.
I mean, I think we'll see, blockchain technology, NFTs used more to sort of certify provenance. So it will be kind of a useful underlying technology. And I think that will be across all sectors, luxury, investments, real estate. Blockchain will just be there in the background, sort of registering sales and sort of helping, markets root out forgeries and all that kind of thing. So, it's going to be really helpful technology, particularly in markets like rare whiskey and wine, where you are vulnerable to forgeries, and sometimes it's hard for even experts to weed those out. I mean, in terms of the actual market for what we call NFT art or NFT collectibles, I mean, it's my 14-year-old son thinks he can make money buying and selling these NFTs. And then he said, Dad, I bought an NFT of a Marvel comic. And I said, well, how many of them were there? He said, there's only 20,000. It was a limited edition. I'm saying, no, 20,000 is not a limited edition. I mean, so, people are trying to redefine the market and redefine rarity. But, just because it's an exciting new technology, it's, you can't get beyond the fundamentals. It's got to have some kind of decent provenance. It's got to have some kind of limited additional rarity values. I'm not completely old and fuddy-duddy. I'm not going to say that just because they're not tangible that there's no future for NFTs, but I think at some point the market, the normal rules of a market will have to reassert themselves. People can't just keep spending money on something that's A, not rare, and B, could have even been generated by an algorithm on a computer. I mean, 10 years down the line, who's going to want to buy the 20,000th edition of something that you don't even know who the artist was? I mean, whenever you get new art trends, like, the new Brit artist like Tracy Emin, she sold, like an unmade, disgusting bed, and everyone says, well, that's not art, but it's stood the test of time, and people still pay lots of money for that sort of temporary art. And I think it will be the same for NFTs. A lot of people will say they have no value whatsoever, but I think there will be value, but for carefully curated artists who put a lot of thought into the NFT art that they create, and they build up a reputation. I think, when it comes to stuff that's churned out in the 20,000s or whatever, I don't see that could ever be considered a collectible asset class that's appealing to people who've got too much time on their hands, spend too much time on computers, possibly Bitcoin enthusiasts who think that everything digital is going to turn to gold, but actually it can't all turn to gold just because of the rules of supply and demand.
I wonder how generational some of that is too. Billy and I were kind of furrowing our brow together at furniture being included in the index, and I enjoy roaming through antique stores and have some older like furniture pieces and things like that. But I was just kind of thinking about as you were talking about NFTs and the folks who are shelling out a lot of money for digital art. They likely have no interest whatsoever in old wardrobe and armoires, right? So I wonder how much of it too ends up being kind of ebbs and flows generationally, and whether or not we'll see a peak here, and then with Billy and I's kids, NFTs, why'd you guys do that? And then it comes back around. Just I don't have an answer, but
yeah, I mean, it's interesting you talk about furniture, because as I said earlier, you've got to look at actually what the index is tracking, and we actually took out the sort of brown furniture aspect of it, the armoires or the sideboards, because there was just no market for them. So now our furniture index is tracking more contemporary sort of 20th century furniture that almost looks a little bit like art. I mean, in the Wealth Report this year, we've included a piece by the designer Ron Arad. Actually, it was from 1993, and it's a sofa that kind of doesn't look comfortable enough to sit on, but it set a world record when it sold for £1.2 million, because he's a well-known designer, and it's a kind of funky-looking sofa that almost looks like it's going to be a work of art in your living room. So yeah, furniture is a huge market, and if you've got an antique table, unless it's from one of the very, very best antique makers, it's probably not going up in value. It's probably you probably pay more for something from IKEA or something like that you've got to build yourself. Whether it comes back in the future, I don't know, but there's just an awful lot of brown furniture kicking around in all of those sort of flea markets and sales that you might go and look at.
Yeah, that explains a lot. I was actually asking Grady, going back to our Antiques Roadshow to show here in the U.S. often they'll have an early 1800s wooden armoire, and they're like, oh, this is a perfect example of the style. I'm like, yeah, but it's hideous. I don't care if that's worth a lot. you'd have to pay for storage. I'm not going to put that in my house. So I would rather have a weird looking couch than the 17th century one. So that makes sense.
Well, we've come up with a lot of answers today. It seems it's like it just one depends on interests, and then when you have I think with these digital assets like the communication online, whether it's through Twitter and online platforms like Reddit, Discord, where people are able to kind of join in community and shared interest, I think it raises the floor so much more quickly, right? Because there's definitely interest in antique brown furniture still, but are those folks kind of coming together en masse and buying up whole segments of the market? It might not be possible, like you said, with the amount of those assets out there.
Well, I mean, you actually have to physically go to a sale, and you have to transport it, and you probably have to hand over real cash for it. Whereas an NFT, you can sort of do it in your coffee break at work. You're just cruising on your laptop, and you just press a button and you've bought it. So the actual process of acquiring an NFT art doesn't really involve the time and the labor or whatever to acquire certain other assets. So I think there's when it's easier to buy these sorts of things, it that encourages more people into that. Another thing that really surprised me, or always surprises me, when I'm compiling for the Wealth Report, a list of the sort of top auction items, is just how much collectors are prepared to pay for what seem to be really, really weird things. So, for example, sneakers or trainers worn by famous sports people are attracting huge amounts of money. For example, last year, a pair of Michael Jordan's Nike Airships sold at auction for $1.5 million. So it's quite staggering how much people are prepared to pay for a pair of sort of pair of smelly shoes. So it's really interesting just to see how much collectors are prepared to pay for their passions. And obviously Michael Jordan was one of the world's most amazing sports stars, and people want to buy into that celebrity, that that skill, I suppose, by just owning a little bit of history, whether that's a pair of shoes that he wore in an important game. So the sort of just the range of things that people are collecting is growing. And actually, one of the things that we discovered this year is that the average age of high net worth individuals and wealthy, it's getting lower. There was quite a significant proportion of people under the age of 40 who were self-made, who were in our wealth index this year, and that perhaps reflects the things that they're spending their money on, whether it's Pokemon cards or sports collectibles, that kind of thing. That the world of luxury assets is becoming much wider.
Yeah, I was going to say two things. I think to your note, one on the furniture, even going back to whiskey and some of the other things, I think one use case for NFTs and the actual rarity components, because right now when you make an NFT, you can just bake in rarity elements and you can say this is going to be more rare than this. And then so when you go to a tool like raritytools.com, or not rarity tools, rarity.tools, you can kind of see how these NFTs are ranked in terms of perceived rarity. But I think it will be interesting back down the line where if, like, say, a distillery or a whiskey person has 5 casks left, and then that's updated on their rarity for that NFT, and you have ownership via that NFT. I think that could be really interesting. But moving on to what you kind of mentioned with the furniture needing to be in one spot, same with, say, these shoes. I think that would be something somebody would probably want to have on display in their apartment. But that brings us to kind of where we come in. And, when you say baseball cards, it reminds me of other collectible companies, is that this Reg A Plus model in the US is allowing people to invest in these, maybe have their passion, whether it be like real estate, art, in the case of Masterworks here, or like wine with Vint, is to still own these assets without having to manage and take care of them, and physically, move them from place to place. And I think over time that will also be expanded to NFTs, and that would be a common use for that. Do you think that's going to expand, I guess, interest in the market as a whole, like opening it up to everybody? Do you think this is something that's like really for the wealthy, or do you think over time more and more individuals, like for Vint especially, like we're looking at people really interested in wine, they don't know how to get into it. Do you think there will be kind of a learning curve where people are like, number one, I can get a share of these collectibles and this is why they're important?
I think it kind of will depend on the asset class. I mean, what wine, it makes perfect sense to sort of put your trust in experts to assemble a good portfolio of wine. And I suppose, you can, if there's a particular wine in the portfolio that fascinates you, you can always go and buy it separately and drink it just to see what it's like. But if I was looking at something like Pokemon cards, would I want to buy into a collective fund of Pokemon cards, or is the pleasure of really having my own collection of cards at home that I can show off to my friends? I think it's going to really depend on the asset class, to be honest, because I think I have heard that people are sort of talking about building investment funds based around sneakers. So they'll go out and acquire a load of 10 pairs of shoes and stick them in a fund and sell shares in that fund. But I think if you're so passionate about sneakers, you probably want to own them and, as you say, display them yourself. But whenever an asset class does become popular and you see values rising, you do generally see a fund structure coming up.
Yeah,
around it. I mean, it's like classic cars. There's lots of kind of funds around classic cars, but I think if you're really into classic cars, what's cool about a classic car is driving it. Really, you want to have access to those cars to be able to enjoy them, and that doesn't particularly work very well with a fund structure, because letting anybody go and drive those cars isn't great. So I really think it depends on the asset class, to be honest. So some makes sense to put them into a fund structure. Others, I'm not sure that it does to such an extent.
The really popular fractional asset platform here, Rally Road, I think understood this early on, because I'm not sure if they do it with each of their collections, but with many of their collections, they will send out some kind of tangible object. For instance, I know they had like one of the CryptoPunk NFTs on their site, fractionalized, and they sent out little pins of the NFT. It was the little neon-haired CryptoPunk figure on a pin, and I know they've sent around figurines and just little kind of trinkets and objects that folks who have shares in collections can display at their homes. So I think they actually kind of done a good job at bridging the gap between fractional ownership and not actually quote unquote owning the whole physical asset, but also giving something as kind of a token for people to be able to display in their homes.
There's a bit of tangibility to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they've even set up museums kind of around the country where you can actually go and see the sports car that is fractionally owned. You can see that same car there at kind of the pop-up museum. So they've kind of done some really interesting things in our space with tangibility.
Also, building on that, though, to your point, when you mentioned wine is the perfect, I hadn't really thought about it as much, but you do eventually want to see that baseball card, whether it be in like a museum setting or you get a small piece of something that represents it. It is interesting to think of the level of maintenance and I guess upkeep along with acquisition that's needed for some of these assets. Say you invest in a really high-end baseball card, but it's in the proper that storage case and it's basically indestructible in that case. You could have it up as long as it's not in, I assume, direct sunlight. It won't fade or anything. So you could have that out and it's easy to almost like ship or bring with you. But wine, on the other hand, is not something you would have it in your cellar anyway. Even if you had nice wine, it wouldn't be out prominently displayed until you wanted to share it to drink. So I guess there is a difference between, no matter what, your wine's going to always be in a cellar. So you might as well have experts taking care of it and sourcing it. Whereas like when it comes to shoes or a car, that is kind of a little different ball game.
Yeah, you've got to nurture your wine, haven't you? You can't just leave it and hope that it's going to be okay in 2 decades' time if you haven't looked after it and it's, I don't know, been vibrated or the temperatures have been wrong. You've kind of destroyed your asset, haven't you? So actually making sure it's looked after is pretty important when it comes to wine, which is, again, a big difference with whiskey. Unless it falls off your shelf during an earthquake, it's pretty hard for you to destroy a bottle of whiskey, because the content inside is sealed, so it will stay pretty much as it should do, regardless of what you do with that bottle.
And that goes back to your point there, like the difference in the two things. People do want to put those on their shelf. They want to have the full collection of the whiskey, or they can leave it out so everybody can see it, whether it be on their mantle, their shelves, or on their bar cart. So that's interesting. All right. Well, I know we've already kept you longer than we anticipated. Is there anything else you want to note for this year's Wealth Report? Otherwise, we really appreciate your time.
Just encourage people, really, if they're interested, to download it and have a look at some of the amazing sort of luxury asset classes that sold last year. We've got cars, we've got coins, we've got even meteorites this year. So there's a whole host of interesting things to look at. So yeah, just have a look at the report, follow our index, and enjoy collecting, I suppose, is all I would say.
Awesome. Where can our listeners find the report?
Online, www.knightfrank.com/wealth report. It's all there.
Perfect. That's easy. And It's free for everybody listening. It's free, it's accessible. It's a really interesting report. So I definitely recommend checking it out.
And we'll provide a link in the description of the podcast, so anyone that wants to check it out can go there. But thanks so much, Andrew. We really appreciate your time and just willingness to share, and bantering a little bit about collectibles in the future, hopefully. So go out and buy your baseball cards and your sneakers, and we'll meet up again next year.
No, fantastic to chat, Brady, Billy. Really always interesting to talk about these asset classes.
For questions, comments, or feedback on the Vent podcast, please email us at support@vent.co. To check out our current offerings and to sign up for the Vent platform, find us at www.vent.co. That's www.vint.co. Vent and VV Markets are offering securities pursuant to Regulation A. Our offering circular as amended can be found on the SEC website. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments such as those on the Vent platform are speculative and involve substantial risks to consider before investing. We may provide communication that may contain certain forward-looking statements that are subject to various risks and uncertainties. Information provided in any communications is not legal, business, or tax advice. All prospective investors should consult a legal, tax, or business advisor concerning the subject matter of any communications and any offering.